This is Julian Ritchie, and I'm with Joan Bird and Michelle Richaud. And we're here tonight interviewing with Joan I'll turn it over to you, Michelle.
Okay.
You asked Joan what kind of scientist specifically
well, Joan
specializes in.
Well, I'm going to go back further. 2 years ago we met, or was it 3? I can't remember, at the Alternative Energy Resource Organization conference, otherwise known as ARROW. And I happened to bid on one of the silent auction items and won. And it's this wonderful book. Julian, do you want to put it up to the camera?
Yeah,
it's
sure.
Montana UFOs and Extraterrestrials, written by Joan Bird. And today, ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to say that Julie and I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing Joan and hearing more stories, stories from this book and stories that Joan hasn't shared yet with the wider audience. So be prepared.
Oh, wait a second.
Yes,
Let me see the book again.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the name of the book is Montana's UFOs
And Extraterrestrials.
and Extraterrestrials. Okay, just
Nice.
so that in case you couldn't see it.
Riverbend Press, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Darling.
Very good read here. Okay, all right.
There it is. And Joan has a website. I'm just going to say it right now. And what is it? You're going to say it.
MontanaUFOs.com.
Thank you very much. Now to the credentials part. Joan is a PhD in zoology, studied at University of Montana, graduated in 1983. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. Thank you. And Joan, you became interested in the phenomenon that is unexplainable in 1999 when crop circles started popping up in the Flathead, and you became interested in knowing what that was all about. You were assigned to create an article about that. Would you tell us more and lead us into the phenomenon and the stories that occurred in the Deer Lodge area back in what years were those? In the 40s? 50s? 50s. Excuse me.
50s and 70s.
And 70s.
Is when I have some good stories.
Okay, well, we're ready to hear them. Because you know what, people, this is fodder for your Christmas dinner conversation. You do not have to talk politics. You could talk about other stories, like the unexplainable, because, it all fits in.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that some of your listening audience will actually know some of the people involved. I think that's
that's right.
highly likely. Yeah, and they've gone public with this, so I can name names.
You said there was 20 sightings or experiences, extraterrestrial encounters in Deer Lodge?
When this documentary was done in 2004, that was done by a woman named Linda Cowan, who graduated from high school in Deer Lodge in 1963. But this was actually, I believe, in the 50s when she was having the experiences that she documents in this documentary. But when they did the documentary, they did the research for it, I believe, in 2003 and maybe 2004. And they talked to a lot of people in Deer Lodge, and they had 20 people that were willing to sign affidavits saying that their experiences were absolutely true, either that they personally had of sightings, or that close family relatives had people that they believed had sightings in the Deer Lodge area.
And you're speaking about this documentary.
Yeah, the documentary is called The Secret of Red Gate, because I guess there is a place outside of Deer Lodge called Red Gate where the high school kids would go that had some spooky stories about it. So that's why they decided to name it, which makes it confusing because then people think it's about Red Lodge, but no, it's about Deer Lodge. And what happened was that she started having these strange dreams when she was ill for a long period of time, and in trying to understand what they were about, she went to a therapist who did some hypnotherapy with her, and she started recalling having these experiences with these strange little gray beings along the banks of the Clark Fork River, which was very close to where her family lived, just a little bit on the south side of town, as I recall. She took me there. And she remembered that in these hypnotherapy sessions was having these memories where she and her brother were there. And so after one of these sessions, she called up her brother, Steve, and she said, I'm having these very strange experiences in hypnotherapy sessions of recalling being with these little gray aliens along the river. Do you remember that? And Steve said, yeah, we used to play with them all the time. Don't you remember? He had never forgotten, or for him it had never been repressed. So this was very interesting to her, and she wanted to try to understand more. And then she remembered that there had been other people that she knew in Deer Lodge that had had strange experiences, including some guys in her high school that had been athletes, and probably the in guys, the jocks at the high school that had a very strange experience that really scared them very badly. And what happened with them was that they were out driving around on some, probably after a game some night, and noticed that there was this bright light in the back of the car, and so they were trying to outrun it. And the faster they went, the closer it got.
Oh,
they were not getting away from it.
Like in the movies.
Yeah, and it was terrifying to
I'd
them.
be freaked out.
What Close Encounters of the Third Kind, is it what it was called? With the Devil's Peak in, is it Colorado?
No, it's Wyoming.
Wyoming. Okay, there was a scene just like that.
Oh.
Where they were driving the...
Yeah, I think I
They
remember
probably
that.
saw the documentary.
Probably. Well, I don't know, because that was a long time ago.
There it is.
Yeah, actually, it's reported fairly frequently. So all that the guys could remember, and they were able to interview at least two of the guys that were in that car that she remembered when she and this researcher, Jim Mars, who's pretty famous in the UFO world, and also he was a journalist who specialized in researching conspiracy theory and UFOs, but a very interesting man, and he always had good times going to places and doing research in the local bars. That was one of his favorite things to do, was to do research over beer. So some of you in Deer Lodge may remember Jim Mars, because he was hanging out for a while in Deer Lodge and talking to people. And that's where they were able to get the 20 affidavits. They got a lot of witness reports and were able to find these guys. And the guys were willing to do hypnotherapy to see if they could uncover any more than what they remembered, which was only the bright lights. And so they did hypnotherapy with a well-established, highly revered, actually, therapist who's from Laramie, Wyoming. His name is Dr. Leo Sprinkle. And what they found in these hypnotherapy sessions was that they actually got out of the car when they were, I believe the car may have stopped on its own, because that sometimes happens, that the cars are
It's like
deactivated.
EMP sort of.
Yeah, something happens and the cars die. And they got out of the car, went to the back of the car, and were looking up and saw this huge bright light.
Wow.
And saucer-shaped or round-shaped.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, and they were very, very frightened. Very frightened. And then...
They didn't have Xanax then either.
Yeah.
Right.
And there are many of these events that are recounted by witnesses in this documentary. But what was particularly unique, and which has not been done in any other documentary that I've seen, was not only did they had the witness accounts, and then they had the witness accounts under hypnotherapy, and then they went to another level. They brought in remote viewers who had been trained by one of the best remote viewers in the field, a man named Lynn Buchanan.
Okay, Lynn Buchanan. Let's go back to what is a remote viewer?
The remote viewing programs were actually developed by the CIA. They were intelligence programs to try to understand primarily what was going on in the Soviet Union. This was before we had the kinds of satellites and satellite photography that we have now.
Or drones or any of that.
Right, way before that. Yeah, I guess we're talking back in the 70s, maybe 60s. And Stanford Research Institute was one of the places where this was pioneered. And they developed a protocol for helping people be able to sense in some way details about a specific location or a specific site that they wanted more information. So maybe they knew that there was some kind of odd structure that they were able to see with the cameras that they had available at the time from satellites. And then they would bring in the remote viewers to find out more information. And many times they could draw buildings, they could get a sense of underground structures.
Oh, almost like
Ground penetrating.
telepathic,
Yeah.
sort of?
Yeah.
This is our government money
It's
at
like,
work.
you can call it, it's similar to clairvoyance,
Okay.
but there is a specific protocol that you use, and you go into a very relaxed state. You can't really use the left brain, you can't use the analytical brain. You have to access another kind of brainwave or knowing, and you need to be in a very relaxed state. And I've actually taken a class in this, and so I'm aware of the protocol, but it's the kind of thing that you need to practice in order to get very good. Anybody can be trained, but some people are way better than others. And so the CIA actually had a stable of people that were incredibly accurate with their remote viewing. And one of those people was Lynn Buchanan, and he established a school and trained people. So they brought in 2 of his students to do a remote viewing of this event where these guys, where these guys were so frightened. And remote viewing protocol uses a double-blind situation where the event is given coordinates, and they don't have anything to do with GPS coordinates. It's not about location. The event was these boys having this experience, and that's assigned a number, and then that number is put into a sealed envelope, and that envelope is handed over to somebody who does not know what's inside of the envelope, and that person hands the envelope to the remote viewers, and then they remote view that event. And the 2 remote viewers, both of them, said that the boys not only saw the spaceship, but they were taken into it, that they were lifted up into it. And they were not able to remember any of this or recall this, but they were able to describe the fact that there were young, very athletic men in this vehicle that was on a road at night. They were able to describe many of the details of the event and then take it a step further, revealing things that the boys could not, their conscious memory and even their memory under hypnotherapy did not allow them to remember.
So maybe their memory was zapped by something.
Possibly,
Like,
yeah.
The Matrix, whatever.
The Men in
The
Black.
Men in
the
Black.
Flasher.
Yeah. And there's no way to prove it. I mean, there's no way to prove that they actually did go on board the spaceships, other than the fact that there were 2 different remote viewers who both said that they...
And they were blindly handed these envelopes by people who didn't know what were in the envelopes.
Right, double blind.
Yeah. And double blind.
Yeah, which is very interesting. And that's why this documentary is so interesting.
The Secret of Red
And
Gates.
the woman who produced it, her websites came down a number of years ago, and I wasn't able to get any more. We had gotten to know each other because we actually premiered this movie in Helena at the Myrna Loy in 2005, and then we also took it to the theater in Deer Lodge, the Rialto.
Oh, Rialto, yeah.
Yes, and we showed it there.
Yeah.
And there were over 350 people that came.
Wow.
What was the conversation like afterwards?
Well, there was a lot of buzz, and
I can only imagine.
and a lot of people. Well, Linda asked me to come with her because she was a little bit nervous about coming out about this information in her hometown and coming back to her hometown. But what happened afterwards is she was mobbed by a lot of people that were really glad to see her, plus a lot of people that were part of the film and the filmmaking and knew that it was coming out and were supporting her in what was an incredibly courageous act for her to make the movie in the first place and to acknowledge that she and her brother had these experiences, but then also to bring it to her hometown and say, this was happening to me as I was growing up.
I'm curious about, Linda and her brother,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering, like, how they feel now about those experiences. I know that Linda's brother has passed.
Yes.
And I know that Linda's struggling with some health issues, possibly.
Right.
And I'm just wondering if you got a sense of how her interactions as a youth with these playmates on the Clark Fork, how that impacted her life, and how she felt about it as an adult, learning about it after all those years, and knowing that her brother had total recall of it. And did you get a chance to talk to him about how he felt?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. There was a high school reunion where both of them came to Deer Lodge a couple of years, I think, after. Yeah, it was 2006 or 7, somewhere in there, that they were in Deer Lodge and were able to come up to Helena and talk more about their experiences. And on the video, in the documentary, as well as in person, when they would talk about their experiences, it was very emotional for them. They both really missed having that contact with these beings. And it was an experience for both of them that was very precious. And obviously they had developed deep connections, not especially with the Greys, but with these other beings that were more praying mantis-like.
They described there were
Yes.
2 separate, or were there more than
2
that?
different kinds of beings
Okay.
that they had exposure to. And one of them were these smaller Greys that are kind of reported frequently in the literature, with the almond-shaped black eyes and the pear-shaped faces and very, very thin limbs and shorter than we are, smaller, child size.
What do their lips look like?
3.5, hardly any.
Okay.
Very small mouths, no ears. So she felt that those were actually not as intelligent as these other beings, and she referred to the one that she had contact with as the grasshopper lady, because she'd never seen a praying mantis. But in the UFO literature, there are a number of many reports of contact with these mantis beings, and many people say they are incredibly advanced and very spiritually evolved as well. And both of them, when they would recall these encounters, they would tear up. These experiences were very important in their lives, very formative, and they missed that contact. They no longer had that contact. And when they recalled it, it brought up a lot of emotion. Yeah.
It's amazing.
It is amazing.
That's just one story of, I don't know how many you have packed away in your lovely locket of hair.
Was there any account or any questioning of where they came from?
Oh yes, that's a good question.
I don't think so. I can't remember anything, because this happened when they were children, so I don't think.
What age do you think? Did they say what age?
Very young. They dramatize it in the movie, and they show her as being like 5, and her brother as being like 7 or 8 or something like that. So very young. I have met other people in Montana who have had encounters with mantis beings. And again, I don't know of any specific location that I can associate with that. But actually, there's a new book out that compiles a lot of accounts of people that have had contact experiences. And I was reading a story in there about kind of a miraculous healing that happened with a mantis being. And the person who had the experience said he thought they came from one of the star systems in the Pleiades. And I know that other people have talked about beings from the Pleiades that look very much like us. So they're very much like us. So I hadn't heard before of there being mantis beings, but there's a lot of different stars in the Pleiades, and there's a lot of different planets around each one of those stars. So
I recall an earlier conversation that we had today, and you were saying the Cherokee Nation has a woman who. Do go on, please. You know what you're talking about.
So do some of the which was it, the Aztec or the Mayans from South America? Had some alien.
Oh yeah. There is a woman who is a retired professor from MSU. Her name is Artie Sixkiller Clark. She's a professor emeritus. She was an education professor, but she also started a a bicultural institute, because she was part Cherokee, and she had grown up with her grandmother on a Cherokee reservation in North Carolina. And her grandmother had told her as a child that the Cherokee say they are descended from Pleiadians, and that many, many years ago there had been people from the Pleiades, from the Seven Sisters. They have, I think they call it the Sisters star system, that came to Earth and lived with him for a while. And at some point, most of them left, but a few of them stayed and intermarried with the Cherokee and became part of their genetic lineage.
Will you say the professor's name again, please?
Her name is Artie Six Killer Clark, with an E on the end. And she has 3 books that are all stories from American Indians or Mesoamerican Indians, indigenous peoples. They are all anonymous, so these people are not telling these stories in order to become famous or in order to attract attention to themselves. In most cases, she does not name the tribe. In some cases, the stories you can tell where it is by the location. But she had collected 700 stories by the time she wrote her first book, which contains 33 of the most jaw-dropping, amazing stories. And her first book was called Encounters with Star People, Untold Stories of American Indians. That was the first one. And the second one is about Mesoamerica. You can find her books on Amazon. Last I heard, she was having some health issues. I don't know what her situation is now, but she was living in Belgrade, last I knew. So
okay, and also we're going to jump back to an earlier conversation that you and I had. Sorry, everybody, we've been together for a while. Oh, it's been great. And I'm going to talk about the well drilling incident. And
oh, goodness.
yes, please. I'm just going to let you take. Oh, wait, hold on. Because we were talking about 2005 when this documentary came out.
It came out actually in 2004, but it was shown in Helena and Deer Lodge in 2005, and this was the front page of the Independent Record, where there, I don't know if you want to hold it up, but there is an artist's rendition of this craft that is kind of spider-shaped, had legs on it. And there is another report from a person in Anaconda who talked about having seen a craft like that. And then the headline is an interview with one of the people in Deer Lodge. Her name is Cindy Clausen, and I've actually spoken with Cindy. She was one of the witnesses and was a good friend of Linda's, talking about the film and also about these experiences. So
let's say the date so people can look this up in the archives of the Independent Record. Thursday, April 14th, 2005. Close Encounters in Deer Lodge.
And I bet there was something in the Deer Lodge paper, but I don't have that newspaper. But I'm guessing that there probably was something there too. So this other story, now both of these stories, I did not write about these in my book. There just was not time. I really had to limit how many. I wanted the book to be bite-sized. I didn't want it to be overwhelming because literature is overwhelming. I wanted it to be a good book for people new to the subject. But there are all of these other stories that I've heard that I would like to get out. The other thing is that these stories are a little harder to digest if you're new to the subject. This is pretty amazing for people that have not considered that this could possibly be real.
Wait, you're talking to people who are going to go celebrate Christmas, and they believe in, some of them probably are telling their kids to believe in Santa Claus, and they all went through the whole.
But that's a cultural thing that is widely accepted. There is official disclosure going on right now. It's a little bit under the radar, but the Pentagon recently admitted that they
have. Sorry, I just had to throw that in.
Jingle. They heard the jingle. They looked out the window.
There's the sleigh.
And it was almost exactly a year ago. It was December 16th. Actually, we are coming up on that anniversary, when there was an article in the New York Times indicating that the Pentagon finally admitted that yes, they did have a UFO research program. And there are a number of people who are recent retirees from military and intelligence who are saying it's time for the public to know. And there have been a number of interviews with some of these people. So videos have been released that show UFOs and show pilots talking about them.
Did you have a senator or somebody that had admitted to something about UFOs? Was that last year or something?
Well, the presidential candidate Kucinich admitted to having seen UFOs, and he was lambasted in the press for that. So it has still had enough of a stigma attached to it that people have been unwilling to talk about it. However, there was a woman in Florida who ran for, I believe, Congress as a Republican, who admitted that she had had an alien abduction.
Oh, wow.
And she was totally upfront with it in the press. I don't think she won, but she did run, and she did acknowledge this event in her life. So it's getting easier to talk about. So maybe it's okay to start talking about some of these stories that would have seemed very far-fetched 20 years ago, but are getting to be more within the realm of people's willingness to consider. So this story is about a man named Johnny Marshall.
This is the drilling story.
Yes,
Okay.
the drilling story.
And where's the setting?
Anaconda.
All right, Anaconda.
Okay, now
That's
we're
Deer
jumping
Lodge
from
County.
we're jumping from Deer Lodge now over to Anaconda.
Okay.
Yes, and the driller's name was Bus Roble.
Bus Roble.
Yeah, and he had
What year is it? Decade.
50s,
Okay.
early 50s,
Okay, so Anaconda would have been
52, 53, somewhere around there.
Well,
No,
I don't know. I can't remember when the stack closed.
Okay.
Yeah, well, anyway, there was a lot of contract work for water drillers. And Bus Roble was looking in on the home of one of the people that worked for him, whose name was Jack Turney, I believe. And Jack had an assignment that he was supposed to leave for very early in the morning, and Bus was just kind of checking in on him and dropped by his house and was having a cup of coffee with Jack's wife. And Jack Turney's sister was there, and she had a 2-year-old with her. And the 2-year-old was pulling on the skirt of Jack Turney's wife and saying something about riding in a flying saucer. Riding in a flying saucer.
Oh,
Yeah. And Bus Roble, I don't know if he could quite hear that or not, but he didn't think that much about it, and he found out that, Jack was out on the job and everything, but he was just socializing a little bit with Jack's wife. And later that night, he got a call from Jack, and Jack said he'd come home and his wife had told him that his sister had told him this incredible story about meeting the spaceman.
Oh, wow.
So they called...
Wait, hold on just a second. I want to catch up with my brain. I'm just digesting.
Yeah.
Would you repeat that again? Just how, more simple, because I got stuck on the 2-year-old pulling on the dress.
Yeah, the 2-year-old who is the son of this young woman who's the sister of Jack's, and so therefore she's the sister-in-law of Jack's wife. And Bus Roble's, they're all, sitting in the kitchen, and the sister she's not saying anything, but her little boy is saying, ride in a spaceship, ride in flying saucer, ride in flying saucer. And I don't know if Bus really heard that, or it was recounted to him later that his wife heard that, and then heard more of the story after Bus left. So when Jack got back home to his wife and his sister, he heard the whole story, he knew that Buzz had visited. He called him up late at night and said, my sister just told me the most amazing story about meeting the spaceman. And Buzz said, well, let's talk to her. So the two of them called her up, went over to where she was living, which I think was close to Twin Bridges at the time, woke her up and had her tell the whole story. And what she said was that she was working at a bar in West Yellowstone. And this man had been coming in every night, and he was very polite and very interested in her, and was showing up about every night, and they would have conversations. And one night he asked her if he could walk her home, and did that. Yeah. And at some point they were talking, and he said, I'm interested in marrying you. And she was like, what? You know, he says, well, you barely know me. He says, I know, but I think that, she says, I don't love you. I might do it just to have a meal ticket, but I don't really love you. He says, that's all right. I think you would grow to love me after a while, but there's something you need to know about me, that I'm not from here. And she said, I don't care where you're from, you know, Texas, wherever, that's not. He says, no, you don't understand. He says, I'm not from this planet. I'm from another planet. And I'd like to prove it to you. And so he takes her, and she says, I've got to take my son with me. I can't find a babysitter. And he takes her.
And her son.
And her son. Yes, some miles away from West Yellowstone. I don't know, I can't remember if she describes exactly how far. And they stop out in the middle of nowhere and start walking up this road in the dark. But as they start walking up the road, they can see this kind of glow in the distance. And they come, and here is this lighted up, this glowing UFO.
Oh, wow.
A flying saucer, a saucer-shaped UFO. And she's totally terrified at this point.
Well,
like who wouldn't be?
I'm terrified just hearing the story. Like, why is this woman going off into the dark with this man she barely knows?
Well, she'd known him for some time.
Okay.
And he'd always been very polite. He'd always been she had a certain level of trust with him, but she was at this point quite frightened. And as she was looking at this ship, the door opened and a woman came out of it, and this made her feel more comfortable. And he was lighting the path for her, and he said, stay within this light, don't wander outside of it. There was something about the radiation from the craft that he wanted to protect her from. And they went on the craft, and they went for a ride. He asked her where she wanted to go, and I've forgotten now. She decided that she wanted to go.
Better than a limousine ride.
Oh, wow.
I know, right?
It's better than a Tesla.
Yeah. And she did not want to go anywhere. I think she might have said to go to Texas or something. I can't quite remember where she wanted to go, but she could have gone to Bangkok or the moon, but
Mars.
No. Yeah. No, she was. I guess it was enough just to think that she could go somewhere else on the earth.
And this happened. This story took place in Anaconda.
Yeah, and this is the story they heard from her that night.
That night in Anaconda.
And after they got back, she really had trouble dealing with what had happened, and she kind of went on a binge. She was not showing up for work. It was just too much of it.
She had to think about it for a while.
She had to drink about it for a while.
Drink about it.
Yeah, she was really having trouble assimilating what had happened to her, and she, kind of went on
how many people are out there.
a 2 or 3 day bender, and then she drove up to her brothers and her sister-in-laws to try to tell, and that's when they saw her.
Okay.
Was when she was coming up trying to process all of this. And this man's name, he introduced himself as Johnny Marshall. And he told her that he was going to school in Southern California in psychiatry, but that she could reach him at this address. And so he took off, and And at that point, I think he was still potentially interested in marrying her. But at some point, he decided that he thought she had a drinking problem, so maybe that wasn't a good idea after all. Yeah. But she had an address for him. So they told the whole story, and Bus and Jack Turney said, okay, we want you to get him back here. Can you write him a letter? So she wrote him a letter, but before the letter could have even been received by him, he showed up.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Telepathic
Yeah.
lettering.
Yeah, he showed up very shortly thereafter. And they met him, but they didn't bring up what they knew about him. They didn't broach that subject. And he said that he had the summer off, and Bus Roble asked him if he wanted a job.
Oh, wow.
So he lived with Bus and his family for 2.5 months.
Now this is the guy that's from another
Johnny
planet.
Marshall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That wants to marry the girl.
Right.
The person not from this world.
Right. Johnny.
Johnny's the one not from this world. Yeah. And he said he was from. Bus Roble wrote it as Alpha Centaur or something like that, but I think they're talking about Alpha Centauri.
Okay.
I think he was trying to say Alpha Centauri. That's what we would know it as. So he did. He worked as a driller
In Anaconda.
in Anaconda
In the 50s.
in the 50s for Bus Roble, worked with Jack Turney.
Jack Turney.
And what was interesting about that was that he was assisting Bus Roble with the whole drilling business. And I heard from someone I met in the Bitterroot who had known another man who was a driller in the Bitterroot who had worked for Bus Roble, maybe at the time that Johnny Marshall was working for him, but I'm not sure about that. And what Bus had told him was that Johnny Marshall had told Bus how to do something with the pipe, the drill pipe for drilling at the intake to keep it from silting up. Some kinds of slits arranged in a specific pattern that would keep the pipe from silting.
You know what that reminds me? That reminds me of Machu Picchu. And the way it was built, because it's up on the mountain.
Yeah.
And it's been built for the drainage from all the water coming down to not erode the city that's been there for what, like 500 years or something now?
Interesting. Okay.
And I mean, I can't remember if it's Aztec or Inca, or I think it's Aztec or Mayan, I don't know. But it's South America,
Yeah.
in Peru.
The Incans were the ones.
I think,
that
yeah,
Machu
the
Picchu.
Inca. Yeah.
Interesting.
And so I was just wondering
They've
if,
been visited.
well, if the technology
Not that lucky.
that they created, because that was all about the water flow and it was about the drainage, and the way they built that was stacked with, it had foundations of rocks so the water could run through without eroding,
Mm-hmm.
and it was built on terraces
Okay.
that were all catching the water and then moving it.
So they had a
And they
drainage
also,
system.
and they also had the water moving through the city too
Uh-huh.
for actual usage.
Like an
Right.
aquifer.
Yeah, it was like
Artificial
aquifer.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the aquifer. So I was wondering maybe if the Incas didn't have some kind of connection with some of these extraterrestrials.
Well, they certainly had very advanced building skills
Yeah.
and knowledge and technologies.
Yeah.
What Johnny Marshall said was that the planet that he was from was becoming uninhabitable from drought. That it was going through changes, climate changes, and becoming more and more droughty. I believe that, if I recall correctly, that it was a planet that always had the same surface towards the sun. So there was either a very cold or a very hot, and they could only live on that zone that was between the very between the hot, on
the fringe.
edges
Yeah.
of
On
it.
the fringe.
But also, water had become an increasingly scarce commodity, and so they were experts in drilling and finding water. In fact, I think I was just reading when I was reviewing that they were capable of drilling up to 11 miles into the planet. So he had knowledge about how to.
That's
be
quite
most
a
efficient.
serious drilling
Yeah.
operation, 11 miles. I mean, I would think. I know.
Yeah.
All the way to Molten.
That might not have been for all the way
To
to
Malta.
to Molten. So that might not have been for water. It might have been for other reasons. But anyway,
That's a fascinating story.
it is.
So we've covered the story of Linda and the secret of Red Gates. We've covered the story of Johnny Marshall.
Well, we've touched on it. There's a lot more to it.
Touch more. Okay,
There's
do you want to go
more to
on
this
more?
story.
Do you want to disclose more now, or do you want to talk about something else? I mean, I know you were like chock-a-block. That Anaconda, Deer Lodge.
I've got one more story that's probably worth telling.
Okay.
Jack Tierney and Johnny Marshall one day had to go to Butte for some kind of job, and Johnny Marshall really liked to drive fast. He liked cars and he liked driving fast, and so they got pulled over in Butte for doing about 50 miles an hour on, I think it was on Harrison Avenue. I think they were actually, it's somewhere in Butte. And got pulled over by the sheriff in Butte. And Johnny was driving. And when he was pulled over, he got out of the car, he went to the back, opened the trunk, pulled out some papers, showed the papers to the police officer. The police officer looked at the papers, thanked him, handed them back to him, got in his vehicle, and drove off.
How interesting is that?
Yes. This is
But I want that
So
kind
what
of
agency was he
immunity.
involved with?
Exactly. Exactly.
And who signed the paper?
Yeah, and what were the anyway, it's an intriguing piece of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was not able to interview Jack before he died. But I was able to interview his second wife. The first wife that had met Johnny Marshall and been there at the time had also passed. But his second wife had heard the story many times, and she verified that yes, that this had happened. I also was able to interview Bus Roebel's son, who was a small boy at the time that Johnny Marshall lived with them, but also verified everything that was written by Bus Roebel in interviews with him. And then also there is this public access television documentary about Bus Roebel, where a lot of this information comes from.
Missoula Community Access Television.
Yes.
MCAT.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. We'll have to look that up. We'll put a link to it in our article.
I don't know if it's still available.
I'll find out.
But I was able to get a copy of the VHS from Bus Roebel's son.
We'll convert it and have a link.
And I thought about asking the son about the possibility of getting copies made so that I could make them available to people that were interested in hearing the interviews with Bus talking about this whole escapade.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked about two really historical moments in the Deer Lodge, Powell County, and Granite County. Oh, did we touch upon Granite County yet? Do you have anything from Granite County that you want to ask about or find out more information about?
I don't know my Montana geography. What towns
That's
have we got?
Phillipsburg and Drummond.
Drummond, Hall, Maxville,
Yeah, that area.
which is north of Anaconda. About
Yeah.
30 miles. Right
Well-
between, in fact, it's halfway between Anaconda down here and Drummond on I-90.
Okay. I was invited to be part of almost like a deposition that happened at the museum in Anaconda by a man who was the kind of the museum director at the time. I've got his name over here, just the lined paper. Gerald Hansen. And I'm not sure if Gerald is still with us. This was in 2010. And he had brought in half a dozen people that all had stories from around the area. And it seems that one of the stories, was from, the Wise River Canyon. Is that there? Anyway.
I'm not sure.
I'm totally ignorant
Yeah,
in that
but,
department. Well, just Wise River Canyon.
We can look into it.
Yeah,
we'll
which
figure
is
it out.
outside of
I'm curious to know
Anaconda.
Anaconda.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there was also a woman who talked about having seen another spacecraft that had legs on it, that was kind of like the spider-like craft, which was also described by Linda Cowan.
Yeah, there's that picture.
And they didn't know each other. So
Wow.
that craft was seen in a couple of different places.
By different witnesses.
Right, Anaconda and Deer Lodge.
Yeah.
And then more recently, I was speaking in Butte, and one of the people that came to the talk, who was an advisor for this group at the college there, she had some college students that talked about having a missing time event happen between Dillon and Deer Lodge, where they left Dillon at sunset and they didn't arrive until sunrise. 12 hours of missing time, which is a phenomenon
That's
that often
significant.
happens with abduction. And this is recent. This was in the last couple of years.
Really?
Yeah. So
Okay, so I have a feeling, just saying, Joan, that people are going to listen to this and hear these stories and want to contact you through your website. Do you have a way that people can tell their story on your website? They can contact you and share their story?
yeah, I have there's a contact link on my website.
And it's Montana, to tell it your
MontanaUFOs.com.
Montana UFOs with an S on the end? Or UFO? Well, you'll find her. Joan Bird.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Google search. We'll just figure it out.
I can't remember.
We're
One of
trying-
those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your question?
I can't remember.
Oh, there it is. I think that's kind of a perfect ending.
Oh, I was going to say that Joan also has a newsletter.
Oh, yes.
And we'll start publishing that. If
Oh.
you'd like us to.
Yeah.
Well, I don't really post things very often. I occasionally put stuff out there, but
We could share that with the audience,
yes, you could do
which
that.
would give them also another way to get a hold of you.
That's correct.
Yes.
For people who are interested in the UFO.
Okay, so here's one story. I have a story. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know you've heard this story, and I know you've heard this story, but they haven't heard this story. And I can tell this story because it's pretty, not my story, but I've heard it from both people. So I used to work at the Harley-Davidson dealership in Missoula, and Doug Woodall was the owner. And I was sitting down at his dinner table one night, and we're having this discussion about, have you been in, have you seen anything funky, UFO kind of sighting stuff? And yeah, Doug had one. He was living in Great Falls. He grew up in Great Falls.
Yeah.
And, oh, you know the story, I'm going to tell you. And
I just know it's a very active area. That's
the
why
stack,
so much
the
has happened
smoke
there.
stack there.
Oh, yeah.
And he was in middle school, and Monty Dolak was his neighbor down the street.
Yes.
And hi Monty, hi Doug, and I heard the story of how he looked out his window and there's this saucer going around, or three of them in fact, the stack, and
Oh, wow.
and I said to Doug, I said, well, Monty Dolak painted that exact scene in a poster, and he didn't know about it. He didn't know that Monty saw the same thing. But apparently lots of people saw it in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
I don't know, 60s. They're older folks now. Sorry. Yeah, Monty Dolak has a UFO poster that's out there. If you go to his
From the
website.
same sighting?
From the same sighting.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
It's
isn't
called
it?
Saucers Over the Big
Conversation with
Stack.
Monty about
Yeah.
that.
Saucers Over the Big Stack.
Yeah, I
That's
don't
it.
have a color picture in there, but I do have a copy of it.
That's on my Christmas list. I almost bought one yesterday, but I left Missoula too early to get it. Yeah, next time I go. All right. Well, do you have anything else you want to share with us tonight, or disclose about the way you feel? I'm curious. Okay, let's just close with this. How do you feel where the trajectory that we as a human species are going toward or moving towards, in recognizing that this is more than just a phenomenon. It's becoming more than a phenomenon. Where do you think this is going? How do you feel about where we are with it now?
It's an incredibly exciting time because so much information is coming out right now. There are still elements, I think, within this government that don't want it to come out, and there are elements that do want it to come out. So there's this kind of a struggle going on behind the scenes.
Hope.
And the more people that become aware of it, the harder it's going to be to deny it anymore. And I think if we get to the place where it can no longer be hidden, where full disclosure will happen, that there's a lot of potential benefits that can come from that, because many of the people, the huge majority of people that are having contact experiences, are having very benevolent experiences with very positive beings that really want to help humans on planet Earth get through what is a very challenging and difficult time. So I think the more that we can entertain that this is real, the better off we're going to be.
Do you think maybe, in a way, because we apparently astrologically are shifting into the age of Aquarius, but it's a very long process of transitioning to peace. And from my understanding of astrology, this beginning section of it is supposed to be very turbulent and violent. And do you think that maybe we're getting visitors from other places that have greater knowledge than us to help us through it?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what the contactees are saying.
I mean, I once in a while get a sensing that we're not alone, and that there's a consciousness here helping humanity. I can't explain it more than that, but I can feel it.
Have you ever had contact, Joan?
Well, what I say is that I've seen lights, had several sightings, several very interesting sightings of lights, and then I've had some very interesting dreams.
Okay.
So.
Gotcha. Yeah. I'm excited to hear what other stories are going to be coming your way as a result of this interview, and your sharing of other people's stories, and maybe we get together again.
Maybe we could do some kind of forum in Deer Lodge.
Oh yes,
that would be kind of fun. Yeah, some kind of public forum
maybe
or something.
At the
Rialto.
Rialto.
At the Rialto.
Yeah. Okay.
I just would like to encourage people to share their stories, because the more we share them, the safer it is for other people to share them, and the harder it is for anybody to say this is not happening.
Yeah, that's bogus. No, it's not. I saw it too.
Exactly. So if people can be less fearful about sharing these stories, because the whole ridicule factor really kept the lid on for a long time. But that's really starting to lift now. People are getting more comfortable in talking about this.
That the unexplainable and the unimaginable actually exists.
And it's not Santa Claus.
And it could be a good thing.
But it could be Santa Claus.
And
you never know.
Costume.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap this up, Joan. I just have to say, what an amazing sweater, and you look fabulous.
You do, and thank you so
thank
much,
you.
Joan, and thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you.
Two lovely ladies
Thank
this
you,
evening.
QSPN viewers. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you both for inviting me.
Thank you, Joan.
Let's do it again.
Yeah, we'll do a follow-up on this.
Okay.
Well, this is Michelle and Joan and Julian with QSPN Live.
Happy holidays.
Happy holiday, Merry Christmas 2018.
Tell great stories.
Yeah, have good
Conversations.
Good conversation, good holiday dinner, and great times, and we'll see you again soon. Good night.
Good night.